Uruguay. Development in the first half of the 20th century. Development of the government. José Batlle y Ordóñez was the president in 2 terms, from 1903 to 1907 and from 1911 to 1915. He was one of the most important presidents of the 20th century because he represented the middle class and he also brought economic stability to the country. 2 years after the end of his term, the Constitution of 1917 was written. It established a secret ballot, created a House of Congress in which its members represented each region according to population size, and it separated church and state. Another important figure in the first half of the 20th century in Uruguay was Gabriel Terra. He was elected president for the period of 1931 to 1935. However, in 1933, he led a military coup d'etat with support of the upper class. In the same year, he wrote the Constitution of 1933. This constitution dissolved both the legislative branch of government and the Consejo Nacional de Administración, and gave more power to the executive branch. Terra remained in power until 1938. Economic expansion. In the first half of the 20th century, public-owned companies expanded. The Banco Hipotecario, Banco de Seguros, Usina de Energía Eléctrica de Montevideo, and the Asociación Nacional de Combustible, Alcohol y Portland all became owned by the federal government of Uruguay. This period also experienced an expansion of cattle ranching. With the arrival of the first freezer machines in 1905, this product could be easily shipped to Europe, creating a new international trade relationship with the European markets. Population growth. According to a census made in 1908 and 1930, the population went from 1,042,000 to 1,900,000. This was an effect from both immigration growth from Europe and a decrease in death rates due to the new legislation that regulated public health and increased the hygiene levels in the country. Society and legislation. Men were granted the right to divorce in 1907, while women were granted the right to divorce in 1913. Women were also granted the right to vote in 1932. Working conditions changed. This was an effect of the Caja de Jubilaciones, which were founded in multiple cities to regulate these working conditions. Also, a new legislation passed in 1915 which limited the working period to 8 hours. This was called La Ley de Ocho Horas. International influence. Britain was the most influencing country in Uruguay. It owned train companies such as La Estación Central de Ferrocarril, as well as water companies. Uruguay also owed a great amount of money to Britain, and consequently the country had economic and political influence over internal affairs in Uruguay. This debt was greatly diminished after Britain imported a great amount of meat from Uruguay during World War II. With immigration growth from Europe, thousands of Italians immigrated to Uruguay in the first half of the 20th century. As a major consequence of this immigration, Italian costumes and language became a part of the Uruguayan culture. And as an effect, Italians had a great influence in Uruguay. Art and music. During the first half of the 20th century, the most important themes in which composers referred themselves to were important historical developments such as the 2 World Wars and the Great Depression, and nationalism and rejection of international influence, most specifically British and American. Important figures include Luis Cluseal Mortet, which was part of the musical nationalism movement in Uruguay. Art was shaped in the beginning of the 20th century by an European renovation movement that included realist elements and celebrated La Estética, which focused on physical beauty and appearances. Important figures include Carlos Federico Sáez, Carlos María Herrera, and Pedro Blanes Viales. World War I. In the macroeconomic aspect, Uruguay was economically negatively affected from World War I, since many of its products, including meat, were not being able to be exported to countries closely fighting the war, such as Great Britain. The country's GPA also started to fall in 1913 and started to recover soon in 1917. Finally, in 1919, Uruguay was able to get out of the state of physical deficit. Uruguay entered the war in 1917, siding with the Allies. The state faced critics at home from the Nationalist Party, which wanted to stay neutral to the war and international affairs. The Great Depression. The Great Depression began to be seen in Uruguay in 1931, which was 2 years after it started in the United States. Some of the consequences of it include the prices for raw materials went down and so did production. The Uruguayan economy was in recession, which means that the demand is below the potential, causing prices and the GDP to be also below the potential. The country also faced international trade limitations, since Britain proclaimed an imperial preference policy with its colonies and Uruguay. This policy made so that the meat Uruguay exported could only be sent to Britain. And as an effect, Uruguay went into an even greater depression, since the country had to not only recover from the International Great Depression, while not being able to export its main product. Nationalism. As previously mentioned, before the Great Depression, Britain had a major economic influence over Uruguay, similar to the neocolonialism present in Latin America, but coming from the United States. Resistance to the indirect imperialism was seen in literature, music, and in the government itself. The Partido Nacionalista was one of the greatest anti-imperialism groups. They were against an international position on international affairs. They wanted to stay neutral to World War I, and its main goal was to end British neocolonialism in Uruguay. The Uruguayan flag was also an important symbol in nationalism. It was seen as a symbol of unity during the first half of the 20th century. Like Eric Hobsbawm said, agitar una bandera nacional era una forma de adquirir legitimidad y popularidad, which meant that waving the national flag was a form of acquiring legitimacy and popularity.